Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for First Person Conversations with Holocaust Survivors. I'm Bill Benson, and I have hosted First Person since 2000. We are in our 25th year. Each month, we share firsthand accounts of survival during the Holocaust. Each of our First Person guests serves as a volunteer at the museum. Please send us your questions and let us know where you are watching from in the live chat. We are honored to have Holocaust survivor Peter Gorog share his firsthand account of survival with us. Peter, thank you for joining us and for agreeing to be our first person today.
Bill, thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for the audience who logged in today.
Peter, you have so much to share with us today, so we're going to just get started right away. Peter, before you share what happened to you and your family during the World War II and the Holocaust, please tell us about your parents, Árpád and Olga, and their life in Hungary before the war.
Both of my parents were born in 1907, what was that time the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. My father was from Budapest, and my mom for a small town, what is today in Ukraine called Uzhgorod. That time it was called Ungvar. My grandparents and the whole family moved a lot, first to what is today Slovakia, and later on they also ended up in Budapest. My father came from a Jewish family. The Jewishness was like the conservative Judaism in the United States today. My mother came a very observant and very religious family, and they grew up, both of them, in Budapest. My father went to high school, wanted to go to university, but he was rejected because there were anti-Semitic laws in place in Budapest, and those laws restricted the number of Jewish students at colleges and universities. He became an accountant, and he was office manager at a publishing company. My mother was very good with her hands, and after school she went to a vocational school and learned how to make hats for ladies, and that was for her profession for the rest of the time.
And Peter, with her hat business, she served a very diverse clientele, didn't she?
Yes. First, she had customers from friends, and by words of mouth, her talent was acknowledged and rewarded by having more and more clients. She never advertised in newspapers or on radio. She always had plenty of clients, and she had a pretty good income.
Peter, tell us about your parents' social lives before the war.
As far as I could reconstruct from my mom's telling their story and the pictures she fortunately were able to preserve during the Holocaust, they had a great number of friends. Most of her friends were Jewish. They were outdoorsy type. They went kayaking and camping in the summer and skiing in the winter. And they had quite a good social life, getting together, traveling with their friends.
I think you told me that they also did mountaineering, they went dancing, went to the movies. They really had, it sounded like a pretty full life, and love this photo of the two of them skiing.
Yes, speaking of dancing, actually they got to know each other in a big Budapest dance hall where they went independently. My mom was, of course, chaperoned by my grandmother, and they started to dance together, and they just fit so well. My mom, I remember, she was bragging about that they were the best one dancing waltzes.
Thank you for sharing that. I hadn't heard you tell me that before exactly, so thank you. Peter, I want you to know before we continue that we have people watching today and listening to you from all over the place. We have people watching here in the United States, in New Jersey, Wisconsin, Tennessee, Hawaii, and Alaska, the entire country. And I'd like to welcome those who are watching today from different parts of the world, Denmark, Canada, and Malta, for example. So welcome everybody to our program today. Peter, anti-Semitic laws implemented in the late 1930s and the start of World War II in 1939, the two of those things changed things considerably for Jews in Hungary. How did these restrictions impact your parents?
Until the war started in 1939, they had a relatively normal middle-class life in Budapest, as we were talking about their hobbies and pastimes. And I learned later on that those anti-Semitic laws personally didn't affect them in the beginning because they didn't work for the government, so they weren't fired from their job. My mom had her own business. My father worked for a private company, and properties weren't at that time, again, 1939, 1940, were not confiscated from Jews. They weren't in a profession where the number of Jews were restricted, like newspaper editors and doctors and lawyers, when Jewish doctors could see only Jewish patients and Jewish patients could only go to Jewish doctors. So they weren't greatly affected until Hungary entered into the war on the side of Germany.
And Peter, the Hungarian government established a forced labor service for Jews and political opponents who were prohibited from serving in the Hungarian army. In August 1940, your father was conscripted into a forced labor battalion. Tell us what that meant for your father.
Well, the first big change for my parents were when my father was conscripted in the forced labor battalion. My mom was already pregnant with me. It meant for my father, number one, that she could not have my mom while she went through the pregnancy. For mom, it meant that he wasn't around while she carried me. They were in contact by postcards. My mom, fortunately, preserved those postcards. They exchanged actually only the ones my father sent to her. And from those postcards, I could learn what his life at the camp was. Very hard labor, very little sleep. The circumstances were not like living in Budapest, definitely. And but he was optimistic that one day it will end and he will be reunited with my mom.
Peter, we're going to come back to the postcards in just a moment, but I thought I would ask, as you said, when your father was first sent away, your mother was pregnant with you. You were born March 10th, 1941, and your father was able to be there for your birth, but he would soon be sent away again for forced labor duty. What do you know about the time that they had together around your birth? And tell us about this photo, please. Yeah.
Well, that was made in the spring of 1941, and my father was happy. You can see in the picture, definitely. And their life was interrupted when a couple of weeks later he was called up again and they had to be separated. And my mom continued her business. She had to hire a nanny for me to take care of me while she was in the shop.
We have one more photo from that particular time, and this is an especially significant photo for you. Will you say a little bit about it?
Yes, it is significant for me because that's the only photo I have, the three of us together. Unfortunately, a little after this photo was taken, my father was called up again, and that was the last time he saw me. Of course, I don't have memories of him, and it is very special.
Peter, as you mentioned a few moments ago, your mother was able to hear from your father after he was sent away because of the postcards. Will you tell us more about the postcards? And I know that one of the things you shared with me is that they were heavily censored by censors, but he still was able to send those.
Correct. These postcards were military postcards open to the censors. So the only thing my father could write about was how he was feeling and about his conditions, physical, mental, spiritual. And my mom collected those cards, and wherever we went during the Holocaust, and actually we moved quite a few times, the precious little she could carry with her were these postcards and her diary.
Peter, would you mind reading to us an excerpt from your father's postcard, one of the postcards?
Yeah, this is from the very last postcard my father sent in December 1942 when he was taken to Ukraine. Please write exhaustive letters, and if you please send lots of pictures of yourself and little Peter. I gaze on the pictures I have, and they give me strength to struggle. When I get home, we will talk a lot. The work is very hard, but I am getting used to it, and thanks God I can endure in good health. Dear little squirrel, this is a term of endearment in Hungarian. I was so happy to read that dear little Peter is growing up nicely and he's becoming a real person. I'm afraid that he will not recognize his dad, but I hope he will have time to get to know me. I wish a happy new year, a better one than the old. Million kisses to you and to Peter from Árpád, who loves you a lot.
Peter, thank you for sharing that very, very, very poignant excerpt from the very last postcard that he sent. When we saw the image of the postcard a couple of minutes ago, you had shared others with me, and on a postcard, he would write so small to try to get every single thing that he could communicate in that postcard to your mom. Peter, tell us more about, with your father gone, and that last postcard in December. What was that time like for your mother and you with your father gone? You did say that your mom continued her business during that time.
Well, until 1944, when Nazis came in, the Germans came into Hungary, our life was relatively normal. My mom worked a lot, but I learned from her and I read from the diary that we did regular activities. We went to the pool in the summer. We went to the playground. My mom wrote about going to a coffee house with her girlfriends. Of course, they were all Jewish, and their husbands also served in the forced labor battalions, so they exchanged news about them. And also, I read about how my mom felt guilty that she was in a coffee house while my father was in very hard situation.
Peter, what can you tell us about this photograph that we see here?
That was taken, if I am not mistaken, at the so-called Csillaghegy outdoor pool. Very nice settings in practically in the woods, and I was a happy little boy. That's all I know. Again, I was 2.5 years old. Really, I don't have memory, and I'm so glad that this picture was taken.
Peter, your mother stopped hearing from your father after that last postcard that you just read from, which was December 1942. Tell us what news your mom did get about your father or receive in early 1943.
Early 1943, in January, I believe, she got a notification that my father disappeared during war activities. This was a pre-printed form. My father's name was filled in with pencil and the date when he was last seen and the approximate area where he was at that time, and that was a Ukrainian town called Ostrogorsk. So at that time, my mom didn't know anything about whether he was alive or not. He was not with his regular battalion. That's what it was, and that's the only thing she knew, and she hoped that maybe he was captured by the Russians and he was a POW, or he escaped somehow from the forced labor battalion and he was on his way home. We just don't know.
And all that she got on that form was just that he was declared missing. That was all she knew, right?
Correct. The death certificate came later, a few months later, when that was officially confirmed that he was dead. Although, again, because just the elapsed time between his disappearance and the date of that certificate was so long that there was no way to confirm whether he's alive and dead. And for all kinds of legal reasons, they had to declare him dead.
Peter, shortly after that time, when your mom received the notice that he was missing, your mom began writing in a diary. Would you read to us from her first entry in her diary?
Interestingly enough, she wrote this one in February 1943 after she got that notification. And this seems to be a draft of a letter she meant to him. Whether she sent it or not, I don't know. My dearest, although I haven't received a letter from you, I know that you would be happy when you read mine. I try to control my emotions and convince myself that nothing bad happened to you, only you hadn't had an opportunity to write. Next month will be the 1-year anniversary that we said goodbye, and it was horrible. I would not have thought in my worst nightmares that we would be separated for a year or even longer. I was a hero during this year, and I can proudly say that not many women would have endured all by herself without any support these trials I went through. I wouldn't have ever thought that I could be self-sufficient, but I have had enough of it now. And I would love to share in person with you all of my worries and joys. Unfortunately, it didn't happen.
Peter, thank you for reading that for us. That just must have been such an incredibly painful time for your mom. Do you know why she started writing that diary? And can you tell us a little more about the diary?
Well, she never told me explicitly why she started, but we can deduct from the form of the diary and the contents of the diary that first she used a notebook she originally used for writing down the name of her customers and phone numbers and addresses and the size of the hat and the style of the hat they ordered. And interspersed with this customer data, there are some notes he jotted down, and she jotted down for the explicit reason that she would remember of the things that happened to us while my father was away. She was still hoping that one day he will come back and they would be able to share these memories. There are 3 notebooks. The first one is, again, this notebook with customer data and her writings. The next 2 was specifically dedicated just to her memories. And it's fascinating to read it, and sometimes really heart-wrenching that when my mom wrote about her emotions and what she went through during that time.
Can only imagine how painful that can be for you to read that even to this day, Peter. Peter, as hard as life had been for Jews in Hungary, things became profoundly worse when the Nazis occupied Hungary in March 1944. What did that mean for you and your mother and other Jews when the Nazis came in?
This is when my memory started. I just turned 3 years old in March 10, and the Germans came in March 19 or 19, I believe. And life changed completely. Until then, the deportation of the Hungarian Jews to the death camps did not happen. Jews died. Many Jews died in the forced labor battalions. Many Jews died because of the circumstances, the lack of food, being elderly, lack of medical supplies. But we were alive. In April, the government decreed that all Jews have to move what was called the Budapest ghetto. But because the ghetto wasn't big enough to contain all the Jews of Budapest, the government designated houses specifically for Jews. Non-Jews had to move out from those apartments, and Jews moved in, sometimes 2, 3 unrelated families in a 2-bedroom apartment. So we had to move. We left behind, my mom left behind practically everything. She was able to carry a very small suitcase, and she had to carry me. Again, I had to walk because I was 3 years old already, a little bit heavy for her to carry me in her arms. And we ended up in one of those Yellow Star house.
And they were called Yellow Star houses, right?
Correct. That was the name because the government put these yellow stars on the houses to keep track where the Jews were all the time.
Just like we see here in this picture. Yeah.
Correct. This is not the actual house we stayed, but we stayed in an apartment which was approximately 2 kilometers, 3.5 miles from our original apartment. There were no public transportation, so we had to walk, and it was a lot for a little boy like myself.
Peter, before we go on, I'd like to remind our audience to please share your questions for Peter via the chat feature. So please, we would love to get your questions for Peter. And speaking of our viewers, we have a comment from a viewer named Riley. Riley writes, "Me and my Holocaust literature class from South Stanley High School took a trip up to Washington this past week to the museum. It was a great experience to learn and see about everything that happened. We got the chance to meet Peter, and it was such a heart-opening and amazing talk. Thank you, Peter."
Thank you so much for that note. I remember the students, and they are my best customers every Friday when I sat at the survivor desk at the museum, and it was great chatting with you all.
For our audience, if you have the opportunity to come to Washington, D.C., plan for a Friday so you can meet Peter at the museum and have that conversation with him. Peter, in October 1944, life became even more dangerous when the fascist Arrow Cross Party gained control of the Hungarian government. Your mother was arrested during this time, and I know that's one of your earliest memories. Will you tell us about that?
Yes. We were living in this Yellow Star house with 2 other couples, I believe. I remember that the very day when the police came and arrested my mother, what happened then in October when the Hungarian Nazis, the Arab Cross took over the government, they started rounding up the Jews, and the government issued an order that all the remaining Jews in Budapest on October 23rd, they were supposed to show up at the brickyard just outside of Budapest or a railway station which was in Budapest. And thousands and tens of thousands Jews went voluntarily to the railway station. They were told that they will be shipped to somewhere in Poland where they will resettle, and that's all they knew. They brought one suitcase and necessities. They were put in freight or cattle cars, and they were shipped to mostly Auschwitz, and most of them never came back. My mom defied this government order. We stayed behind. Somebody reported us to the police, and a couple of days later, the police came and arrested my mom. They took her away. My mom told me that she will be back in a couple of hours or by dinner, definitely. It was 3 weeks later when she came back.
And what happened to you in those 3 weeks?
I was taken care of by this elderly couple, not related whatsoever, but as far as I knew, life went on the same way. When my mom was there, food was rationed by that time. Budapest was bombed by the Allies, so we had to go to the basement most of the time during the day. And later on, when my mom came back, we had to move again. And what happened, I learned later, much later.
Before you go to that, Peter, tell us, as you said, your mom came back after 3 weeks. It was pretty remarkable that she came back at all. How did she escape from jail?
Well, she did not escape, but she was a very smart woman. She was very determined to survive, and she had something we Jews call chutzpah, but I think it's in the English dictionary also. She had with her a piece of paper, actually the very paper she got from the Hungarian Ministry of Defense, that my father disappeared during war activities. And she used that paper to prove to the warden of the detention center that she was a war widow. War widows at that time was widows of regular soldiers who died during the war, and they had all kinds of privileges and perks. They had greater portion of food tickets. That time they got some financial support, but those who served in the forced labor battalion and died or quote unquote disappeared, their spouses were not war widows. But my mother claimed that she was, and she showed this paper with a big stamp on it. She didn't know whether the warden was ignorant and didn't know what that paper really was, or he had pity on her, but he let her go. And out of the 80 plus women who were arrested with her at that time, only she and another elderly woman were able to get out. And another lucky moment in our life, luck sometimes played a big role, whether one survived or not. But again, this was a combination of my mother's heroism and determination to survive.
I'm thinking back to the excerpt that you read from her diary, where she talked about she's had to have been a hero while your father's away, and she obviously continued that. Peter, we have a question from one of our audience members, and the question is, did your mother hear rumors or hear information about the death camps?
I do not know specifically whether she heard or not. We do know that news came back from people who somehow were able to escape, very few, and some people who witnessed what was happening at the death camps. But those rumors were so horrible that nobody would believe that people would be put in gas chambers and crematoriums and burned. So what people knew was really what the official propaganda was, and what they were told explicitly, that they gonna resettle in Poland and start a new life.
So your mother, her both, as you said, luck, her chutzpah, she was able to get away, convince the jailer that she was actually a war widow's wife. She then had to find refuge for the two of you after getting back home to you, or getting to you. Where did she end up being able to take you from that point?
Well, we had to move again because we cannot risk that somebody would report us again, and she wouldn't be as lucky as she was the first time when she was arrested. She had documents from the Swiss embassy proving that she was about to immigrate to Switzerland, and that paper and tens of thousands of papers issued by the Swiss embassy, the Swedish embassy, the Spanish embassy saved many Jewish lives during this time in Budapest, because somehow, and I cannot explain why, the Hungarian authorities still accepted international laws that people with this kind of documents are under the protection of those countries. And also what these countries did, their embassy in Budapest, that they rented out apartment building, what later was called the so-called international ghetto in Budapest. These apartment buildings were high-rises. The embassy put the sign of the embassy on these buildings, and under international laws, the local authorities, the police, could not enter those buildings without the explicit permission of the country. So we were able to find refuge in one of these houses under the protection of the Swiss embassy. And Karl Lutz, who was the ambassador or the second in command in the Swiss embassy in Budapest, saved tens of thousands of lives by issuing those documents and providing refuge in those houses for many Jews.
And tell us about this photograph, Peter.
This is Karl Lutz in front of the Swiss embassy. He's a hero for many Hungarian Jews whose life was saved by his chutzpah or bravery, because he issued documents not with the approval of his government. He did it on his own. So did other ambassadors also in Budapest. So this was practically a private action. And I have a survivor friend who serves at the museum who was saved by Karl Lutz also.
Mm-hmm. In what you're describing, Peter's, it was sort of a last-ditch effort by a few people in a couple of embassies to try to save as many Jews as possible, really towards the very end there. So thanks for sharing about Karl Lutz and his efforts. So you're now in one of these international safe houses, and you were guarded by the Arrow Cross, which was the fascists that had taken control of the Hungarian government in October. Tell us what you remember about the Arrow Cross guards that were around the international safe house that you were in.
Well, interestingly enough, my mom, she had a tremendous memory, and she remembered names and dates, and she remembered the actual address of the protected house we actually stayed. And just 2 summers ago, when I was in Budapest, I was able to go to that house. That's when I got this information from the videotape I made with her, recording her memories when she was in her 80s. And I remember exactly the building. It was a corner building. Part of the building looked over the Danube, and we was on the first floor. And I remember, and my mom remembered hearing rifles shot. We didn't see anything when we looked out the window, but later on, much later on, I learned that the Hungarian Nazis, the Arrow Cross, took people. They found Jews. They lined up at the shores or the banks of the Danube River. The people were shot in the river, and that's the shots we heard from that building. The building itself had an inner court where we kids were able to play between two bombing raids. As I said earlier, by the fall of 1944, Budapest was relentlessly bombed by the Allied forces, and we spent most of our time in the basement of the apartment building. But between two raids, we were able to go to that in the courtyard, and we played. And little boys, we played cowboys and Indians and police and robbers, and we improvised rifles and tried to imitate the sound of those weapons, said boom, boom, and we shot each other. And these guards, young Nazis in their black uniforms who, quote unquote, protected the building, they actually wanted to make sure that nobody would escape, were sitting in that inner courtyard laughing at us, little boys, the older boys, I think from age 5 or 60, the Yellow Star of David was mandatory. I was too young, 3.5 years old, not even 4. I didn't have the Yellow Star of David. So these young thugs were laughing, Jewish kids shooting each other. Sometimes they gave their real rifles and pistols. Fortunately, they removed the ammunition. And that was fascinating for us little boys who liked weapons.
You believe that that time with the Arrow Cross, watching you play with your friends in the courtyard, may have saved your life. Will you say more about that?
Yes, my mom told me later, because I don't have this particular memory. One day, the Arrow Cross decided that hell with the international laws, and they started to round up Jewish people from these protected houses. And in our case, they started on the top of the building, and we were on the first floor. So by the time they got there, the whole house was practically empty. And when they came to our door, they told my mom, please come. And she said, I have to get my son because he's in the courtyard. And the guy asked my mom, who is your son? And she said, Peter. And the guy said, that little cute boy, Peter. And my mom said, yes. And he told to his comrades to leave my mom alone, and they went to the next apartment. And that ray of humanity, I don't know what caused this young person, Nazi, to save my life and my mother's life. But again, we were lucky that it happened, and it happened just because he recognized me from the playground.
Peter, after that, then, of course, you and your mother were moved again, this time to the Budapest ghetto. Tell us what conditions were like there for you and your mother once you were inside the Budapest ghetto.
Well, what happened to the people in these protected houses was that they were either taken to the railway station, those who were at the age and physical condition and they could work, they were taken to Austria and Germany. By that time, Eastern Europe was liberated by the Soviets, and they were used for forced labor. Some of them were lucky to take the train, some of them had to march, but that's a different story. We were lucky enough that we were in that group. We weren't in the group which were taken to the banks of the Danube River and shot. We were taken to the Budapest ghetto. When we got there, the Hungarian policeman told my mom, keep on going, the Russians are close. In a few weeks, you will be free. Actually, he encouraged my mom under those circumstances. And we moved into a house. There were plenty of houses, empty apartment buildings. Windows were blown out. And even those houses which were not shot or bombed. In the picture, you can see the devastation of Budapest in 1944, 1945. The bridge, the famous Chain Bridge, was blown up. So were all the bridges between Pest and Buda, because the Germans wanted to slow down the Soviet troops. Anyway, we moved.
We can see here the remains of the bridge in the background that you just described.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. And in the front, you can see the bombed out buildings on the Buda side. And so we moved in one of the empty apartments. It was cold. Again, that was November 1944, very cold winter. And we spent most of our days in the basement again because of the bombing raids. And we sit on dirt floor. These basements were originally used for storing the coal and the wood, which were used for heating the apartments during the winter. Sitting on a blanket and in pitch darkness because electricity was out, water was in and out, food was hardly available. The only food we had was when my mom went out between two bombing raids and went to these bombed out houses and rummaged through the remaining pantries and kitchens and finding stale bread and brought back whatever she could find. I have a memory of she coming back with a big slab of bacon. Now, she came from a very Orthodox family. She wouldn't touch bacon under normal circumstances, but this time it wasn't normal to begin with. And I later on learned that you can break the Jewish dietary laws if it saves lives. And that piece of bacon with the calories in it saved our life, really, or gave us a few more days to live until the Soviets came in and liberated us.
Peter, the Soviets did come in, and in January 1945, you were liberated from the Budapest ghetto. We have a video question from a student, Serafina, who's asking about your liberation. So let's hear from Serafina.
Hi, my name is Serafina Ho, and my question is, how did you feel after liberation, and was it hard to understand being so young at the time?
Is asking Peter, how did you feel after liberation, and was it hard to understand that, being that you were so young at the time?
First of all, thank you, Serafina, for this very thoughtful questions. As I said earlier, I'm a child survivor. I was 3.5, 4 years old at that time. So I didn't really understand what was going on. My mom protected me, fiercely protected me, never telling me what was happening. Of course, I heard the bombing. I really don't have memory whether I missed my father or not, because all of the kids around me, they didn't have their father around. So it was kind of natural for me. So it wasn't until later, much later, when I realized that what was happening on. For a little boy, everything was exciting: shooting, weapons, cannons, tanks. And so that was my memory. And I didn't know that those weapons were killing people. I didn't know that those bombs from the airplanes destroying houses and life. So again, I reconciled with my experience later, and much later than when it actually happened. So that's my answer. I hope it satisfies you.
No, thank you for that response to Serafina, Peter. Peter, how did she rebuild your lives after the war?
The picture you've seen on your screen is a picture taken out from a passport my mom had in 1946 when we planned to immigrate to the United States. She had two siblings living in Baltimore in the United States. They wanted us to come. My mom wanted to get away from the horrors as much as possible. Unfortunately, it didn't happen because the Communist Party took over the government in 1948, and while we were waiting for our visa to come to the United States, the borders were closed and we couldn't leave the country. My mom had a very hard life. Of course, she had to give up her business, not because the government confiscated it like all of the other businesses, just because there were no interest in hats. People were busy to rebuild their life and using whatever hats they already had. So she worked as a seamstress in a co-op, making dresses for women, and she worked hard. She worked in 2 shifts from 6 o'clock in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, or from 2 to 10 p.m. And I was all by myself in the apartment at that time. Food was still rationed for a long time. And then, of course, all the tourists or all the troubles of the communist system itself, the complete lack of freedom, lack of free to travel, to read, speak whatever you wanted. They all had effect on us, but we were alive, and we were not persecuted for our religion anymore.
Peter, we have a question from one of our viewers named Finley, and Finley asks, what happened to your father? Did you find out?
No, unfortunately, we did not. Nobody from that very battalion my father came back telling what happened to the people who were there. He was able to locate one person who were touched in another person who saw somebody's diary, and he saw a note in that diary that Árpád today was left behind. And that's all we know by hearsay, but because Árpád wasn't a very common name and Árpád is the nickname, my mom could accept that it was my father. And so we could speculate what left behind meant. We do know that people who were left behind because they couldn't march anymore, they were too weak to march. They sat down, and 20 minutes later, they were frozen to death. Some of them died because officers of the Hungarian army shot them later on when they were tried. They tried to defend themselves, that it was mercy killing, so people will not suffer in those harsh circumstances. And again, we don't know. Mom jokingly mentioned once that she even thought that my father escaped and married a Russian babushka, and he lived happily ever after. But of course, it didn't happen.
Peter, before I turn to my final question for you today, I want to share two more audience comments that we've received for you. Barbara writes, "Thank you for sharing this moving account of your family's life. We need to never stop listening. And I want to share that your daughter, Anna, is watching from Texas." She writes, "So proud to be his daughter." So that's from Anna.
I'm very proud of you, Anna, and all of my many girls and granddaughters too.
Peter, I just have one more question for you, and that is, as we face a dangerous surge in anti-Semitism, please tell us why you feel it is important to share your firsthand account of the Holocaust and what we can learn from it.
When I give presentation to live audience and students all around the country via Zoom. I show a picture of them of Budapest 1944. It's a black and white picture. It shows Jews of Budapest marching down the street with a yellow star on their chest. And I know it was a yellow star, even if the picture was black and white, because my mom had one. And in the picture, you also see a Nazi German Nazi guarding them. And you can also see people in the background, bystanders, people who were standing on the street with a smile on their face, seeing their co-workers or people who lived in the same apartment building, or people they only knew by sight from the grocery store. They saw those pictures. Obviously, they knew that they were Jewish. They knew that they were marching to the railway station and did absolutely nothing. So my advice to students and anybody who sees those pictures, please don't be a bystander. When you see discrimination and bullying and harassment and hatred regardless who is the target of the hatred, you cannot stay silent. You have to speak up, you have to stand up, you have to take action. That's the only way that you can prevent the world from another Holocaust, wherever people live, whatever their religion is or skin color. Hatred has no place in our society, and I hope what you heard from me and other survivors and seeing in the museum when you visit it would help you, and you would be able to help others to understand what the Holocaust was and making sure that it will never happen again.
Peter, thank you so much for those thoughtful closing words for us today. And thank you for being our first person and sharing so much about what you experienced. I know there's lots you couldn't talk about, but in particular, thank you for sharing about your mom, a remarkable, remarkable woman. And I know all of us wish we'd had the privilege of knowing her. So again, thank you for being our first person today, Peter.
Thank you so much for making it possible.
I'd like to also take a moment to thank our donor. First Person is made possible through the generous support from the Lewis Franklin Smith Foundation. And I would also like to invite you to join us next month for another First Person program. Thank you for being with us today.